Cognitive neuroscience. Okay, so a pleasant day to everyone. This would be our next chapter in our subject, cognitive psychology. As we all know and been aware, cognitive neuroscience is not a new terminology to everyone. To start off, this was already discussed in the previous subject, biopsychology. So it is one of the known divisions of biopsychology. Cognitive neuroscience itself is one of the youngest division and the youngest itself division in biopsychology. It studies the neural basis of cognition with some tools and techniques such as non-invasive functional brain imaging. So as an example, they use brain imaging technology to observe changes that occur in various parts of the brain while volunteers perform memory tasks. Okay, some of the few questions that we will be asking throughout this chapter are the following. So what are the fundamental structures and process of the human brain? So if when we are talking about the structures, andito yung brain anatomy. Since na-discuss na natin siya sa biopsychology, hindi na tayo maging ganun ka-in-depth sa learning nito. So pero magkakaroon pa rin tayo ng refreshers kaya makita nyo yun sa mga following slides. Then, how do researchers study the major structures and process of the brain? Paano ba nila pinag-aaralan? Also with this, no, natakil na natin to previously sa ating biopsychology subject, pero magkakaroon pa rin tayo ng refresher at saka samples sa following slides. And lastly, what have researchers found as a result of studying the brain? Makita natin kung ano yung naging product ng kanilang study, no, understanding and learning of studying the brain itself. Okay, so first we can look upon this picture. If we would see, no, in the previous studies, no, according to science, sabi dito, ito daw yung brain structures nung ating ancestors in the evolution of human brain. Though not everyone will believe this specific part or study, according to the scientific studies or anthropologists, no, and many scientists with the specific field, ito yung specific size at saka processes na kaya depending on the cubic centimeters ng brain natin noon in proportion to the skull. So titingnan natin dito yung Australopithecus, which was supposed to be our ancestor 4 million years ago. No, the brain capacity now ranges from 450 to 650 cubic centimeters. Then we have the Homo erectus, the toolman, no? Further development of skull and jaw are evident. Nagkaroon daw ng changes sa jaw at saka sa skull. And the capacity of the brain is 900 cc. Next, the Neanderthal, the caveman. So the human skull has now taken shape. The skull case has elongated to hold a complex brain of 1450 cc. And the Homo sapiens is the brain structures up to present when there is a deeply convoluted brain that reflects growth in areas concerned with higher mental processes with 1300 cc more or less. So makita natin nagkaroon ng enlargement in proportion to the skull because of evolution. Okay, so ito yung sinasabi natin kanina, the anatomy of brain. Okay, so generally, pinapakita muna natin dito yung kabuuan ng brain. So hindi ito yung lahat ng specific parts, ito yung mga major parts na natopic na natin previously sa ating subject. We have here the pituitary gland, the amygdala, basal ganglia, corpus callosum, cerebral cortex, septum, hippocampus, thalamus, hypothalamus, midbrain, pons, cerebellum, medulla, and the spinal cord with their specific function. Where you can see naman, at pwede nilang i-post yung video or tingnan ng mabuti para mas mabasa natin yung kanilang function. Next, we have here the forebrain, no? Familiar naman tayo dito sa regions, wherein ang kanyang major parts are the cerebrum, which is responsible for higher order processing, the thalamus, the relay of emotions. We have the midbrain with its reticular formation, that's main functions are connected to sleep and arousal, where gauge signals by importance such as with attention. And we have the hindbrain with its specific major parts such as medulla, that is responsible for breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, vomit, gag, salivation, which are involuntary reflexes and functions. We have the pons, which is also a bridge, no, a bridge to the neural functioning, that is also responsible and has its own function relating to sleep and arousal. The cerebellum, with its function related to balance, coordination of complex voluntary movement, with some role in learning and memory. Probably may connect natin yan sa muscle memories. So adjoining region holds the basal ganglia, which coordinates slower deliberate movements. Ito yung mga fine movements. Okay? Let's proceed. So ito yung ating central nervous system graph. So we can see here, no? Ito yung mga major parts na binanggit natin kanina. So now we would identify the brain's key structures and function. So titingnan muna natin itong mga major parts na nandito. So first, the thalamus, which is the relay information between lower and high brain centers. So ang purpose niya kaya siya yung nasa gitna is usually relay center siya or channel siya ng information. Next, we have reticular formation. So a diffuse collection of neurons involved in arousal, stereotype patterns such as walking. And we have the pons that governs sleep and arousal. So we also have here the medulla that governs breathing and reflexes, and the cerebellum that is rounded structure involved in motor coordination. So next we have here the limbic system. Makita natin dito, included dito yung may connection sa emotions natin and our temperament, attitude. So amygdala, involved in fear and discrimination of objects necessary for survival. The hippocampus is involved in memory, no? Cerebellum, for motor coordination, part pa rin siya ng limbic. Medulla, same. And the hypothalamus that governs eating, drinking, and sex and plays a role in emotion and stress. Okay, so yan yung major parts ng limbic system. And lastly, we have here the brain functions, yung mga major. We have here the cerebral cortex, no, yung biggest part of our brain, no, which is responsible for extensive wrinkled outer layer, which is the wrinkled outer layer of the forebrain that governs higher brain functions such as thinking, learning, and consciousness. So included din dito yung mga major organs ng ating senses that are specific nerves such as the retina, the olfactory nerve, the gustatory nerve, no? And some other parts. Okay. So nabanggit na natin 'to kanina, no? Andiyan na yung ating limbic system and its function. Note that limbic system may not function as coordinate system. Though we all know that limbic system has their own function that is relating to motivation and emotion, no? May specific time na they do not function in coordinated system. They function individually, no? So, ang hindi natin lang nabasa dito kanina is yung cingulate gyrus that is responsible for attention and control. But yung other ay nababasa naman natin. So, under hypothalamus, nandiyan yung hunger, thirst, motivation, temperature control, and the pituitary gland, which is one of the major glands of the body and responsible for growth. Okay, let's proceed. Next, the cerebrum, also called a new brain. Why do we say new brain? So, because kapag sinasabi natin what is the biggest part of the brain, no, we always think of and pertains to the cerebrum. Though the combination of the cerebrum with other major functioning of the brain, the left and right hemisphere is called the cerebral cortex. So, cerebrum has two hemisphere. Okay, so two hemispheres include the lobes, which we all know, no? And the cerebral cortex is the outer layer of the cerebrum itself. Ito yung mas nakikita natin, yung kabuuan. Okay, so now we will be talking about a case of Elliot, which is a frontal lobe damage. So in 1980s, neurologist Antonio Damasio began studying a patient with damage to a similar prefrontal region. This person has a benign tumor, no? So tinanggal nila yon. And this benign tumor is very large, kaya siya ay nabansagan na modern Phineas gauge. So Elliot underwent significant personal changes that prompted Damasio to describe him as such, no? Since nung tinanggal yung big tumor na yun sa kanya, binigyan siya ng bansang na modern Phineas gauge kasi nakita nila na may effect sa kanya yung specific hole na pinanggalingan ng kanyang tumor. So his knowledge base survived and he could perform many separate functions just as well he had before. So Elliot could not be counted on to perform an appropriate action when it was expected. No? For example, if required to read and classify documents for a given client, Elliot could understand and categorize each separate documents. But he was like to suddenly switch from sorting to spending the entire day reading individual papers in detail. So usually nangyari to sa atin, pero sa kanya, specific na ganun yung nangyari. For example, meron sa kanyang tulad yan, binibigay sa kanyang papel. sinort niya, no, para ibigay sa specific client. Habang sinosort niya, nagbabasa na siya at naubos na yung buong araw na nagbabasa siya, nakalimutan niya na kailangan niyang ibigay yun sa client. And paulit-ulitan nangyayari yun. So, very little lang daw ang impact sa kanyang IQ test. So, hindi naman doon apektuhan yung kanyang IQ, no, which is a convergent and hindi naman divergent thinking. And Elliot's relative and Elliot himself recognized that he was emotionally flat compared to before his illness. What do we mean when we say emotionally flat? So, hindi siya ganun ka-reactive with intense emotions. And usually, they would see him with a flat affect or walang kare-reaction yung mukha to sudden stimulus or other stimulus. Objects and events that evoke emotional responses and most individual fail to evoke an emotional response to Elliot. So, wala gaanong impact sa kanya yung medyo specific stimulus or event na may malakas na impact sa ibang tao. So, talaga masabi na medyo nagkaroon siya ng flat affect. And it's because of the damage in his frontal lobe. Okay, so frontal lobe conclusion. The frontal lobe are considered as our emotional control center and home to our personality too. So there is no other part of the brain where lesions can cause such a wide variety of symptoms. So looking back to Phineas Gage, so due to their location within the head and their size, the frontal lobe are extremely vulnerable to injury. Okay, go. Yan kasi yung nasa pinakaharap ng ating ulo. Yung prone talaga yun sa injury yung frontal lobe natin. So the frontal lobes are involved in the following: motor function, movement, problem solving, memory judgment, impulse control, social behavior, sexual behavior. In 1981, it is found out that individuals with frontal damage displayed fewer spontaneous facial movements, spoke fewer words, and or excessively, no, says a lot of words. Okay. So, depende sa kung saang part yung lesion. One of the most common characteristics of frontal lobe damage is difficulty in interpreting feedback. So, the environment manifests in impaired associated learning. So, may factor na yung specific damage doon, no, sa kanilang pag-feedback sa environment. So, may stimulus man, yung response nila ay hindi yung common response ng isang normal na individual. So, they are perseverating on our response and they have no compliance with the rules. Pero ito yung commonalities kasi ng response lang natin. For example, tulad ng sinabi kanina, an example, yung mga major emotion-evoking stimulus ay walang effect sa kanila. Though meron naman ganitong tao, pero sa kanila kasi hindi naman sila ganun usually or hindi naman sila ganun naturally. Okay? So right hemisphere is dominant function are spatial, emotion, and math. So the left hemisphere daw, dominant function is language, sequence, and math. So meron pa rin specific parts of area. So frontal lobe, inhibition, control, and attention, personality. So temporal lobe rather, sound, smell, time, balance, emotional control, categorize abstract thoughts. So we include here the Broca's area. So semantics without syntax. Andito yung yung specific parts with regards language acquisition. Broca's area yung sa ating pagsasalita, no? Ayan. And parietal lobe. So, andito yung, it's responsible for the pain, touch, and spatial relations. If you could remember the homunculus, yung parts wherein emphasize yung mga sizes depende sa kanilang functions. So, language also. So, occipital lobe, back is the major role is on the vision. The corpus callosum connects left and right hemisphere. So, if separated, it shows split brain functions. Okay? So, somatosensory cortex receives sensory input from touch receptors, and the motor cortex is responsible for the movement or the motor movement. Okay, so hemisphere of the cerebrum. So nabanggit natin kanina yung Broca's and Wernicke's area. So we have here the left hemisphere, no? And kapag meron tayong tinatawag na condition na aphasia, ito yung condition wherein magkakaroon tayo ng impairment or power para maintindihan yung mga words. Usually, resulto ng isang brain damage. It could be from stroke, head injury, or infection. Okay? So, pwedeng ang mga matamaan ditong area or major areas are the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area. Yung Broca's area, ay brain center na associated sa motor control ng ating speech, no? Sa left side yan ng ating frontal lobe. Yung Wernicke's area naman siya ng brain na located sa left temporal lobe, no? And associated yan sa comprehension ng language. Okay, so yung Broca sa speech, yung Wernicke's are sa comprehension ng language. Okay, so we have here what we call the cerebral cortex, localization and specialization. So sinasabi na kapag ikaw ay left brain or ang left brain function majorly ng isang individual ay regarding to analytic thought, logic, language, science, and math. Yung sa right side naman, which is more known as the creative part of the brain, so it's the holistic thought, intuition, creativity with connection to arts and music. Okay. So, ayan, if you would look at that, so then, yan yung part na nandoon, located yung Broca's area. So, yung Wernicke's naman is andito sa lower part. Okay. So, may tinatawag tayong split brain demonstration. So, what would a split brain patient say they saw? So, what would a split brain patient point to with their left hand? So, split brain patients are asked to stare at the black dot in the middle of the screen. So, in our case, white yan. So two different images are displayed simultaneously to each side of the brain. So information about the wrench on the left side so would be processed by the right side of the brain, which controls the left hand. Thus, a split brain patient would point to a wrench. The apple is on the right side and so would be processed by the left side of the brain, which controls language. So the patient will say apple. So here's a study where a patient with split corpus callosum have two lobes function independently. So, according to this, no, yung two lobes daw ay nagpa-function complementarily. Okay? Okay. So, we would look upon this following brain disorders. So, pwede nating panoorin dito sa sa link na ibibigay ko dito sa PowerPoint, no? Pero ibibigay ko rin 'to sa inyong page so makikita niyo 'to. So, some of the brain of disorders that will be discussed here are Capgras syndrome, phantom limb, and synesthesia. So, to bigyan natin ng konting glimpse, yung phantom limb, ito yung kunyari meron kayong naputol na specific part ng kamay, kunyari yung kanang kamay nyo inaputol, pero yung brain nyo iniisip na andun pa rin yung limbs ninyo. So, it will function, no? Kung paano iniisip ng brain, andun pa rin yun. Yung synesthesia naman, it is not a disorder actually, pero this is a mental condition wherein natitrigger yung isang sense, kapag na-trigger isang sense. For example, kapag may naamoy kang specific na bagay, no, malalasahan mo na rin siya. Kunyari, kapag may na-touch ka, pakiramdam mo, makikita mo na rin siya. Combination siya ng senses na automatic na nangyari. So, okay. So we would go now to the neurons. So evidence of neuron growth in 1960s. So Joseph Altman discovered cell division in the brain of adult was detected. So nakita nila yung division ng brain o yung growth ng neuron. So 1980s and 1990s, there is what we call the neurogenesis or the birth of neurons in hippocampus na discovered. Okay, so the major structures of neuron are here. So makita natin dyan, nandiyan yung dendrite, axons, myelin sheath, no? Nandito natin makikita yung axon terminal botons, the soma, the nucleus, and such. So, glimpse na lang to. So, the shape of neuron is determined by its function. So, each neuron, however, has the same structure. Soma, dendrite, and axon, and terminal botons. So, you can use this image as reference. Okay, so some of the following of the structures here, and dendrites are the receptive branches, yung nagre-receive. Axon are sending branches. Axon terminal, yun yung nagko-contain or may buttons na responsible for receiving the neurotransmitters. Myelination, fat layer of axon is speed impulses by insulating axons. So, familiar na ka dyan. Synapse, terminal button, an axon ending holding synaptic vesicles with transmitters. So, neurotransmitters are the chemicals that we all know, which carries the message and is stored in synaptic vesicles. So, synaptic cleft, ito yung part na space between the synapse wherein sasaluhin yun ng dendrites. Receptor size is tailored neurotransmitter docking location. So, familiar na kayo dyan. Na-discuss ko na yan sa biopsychology. Okay? So, pati yan, yung action potential, EPSP at saka IPSP, familiar na kayo dyan. And the refractory period, wherein yung hindi pa pwedeng magkaroon ulit ng another action potential after a while. Okay. So, when speaking of neurotransmitters, I have included here yung mga mas kilala nating neurotransmitters such as acetylcholine, no, associated with Alzheimer's disease, dopamine, associated with schizophrenia and Parkinson's disease, and serotonin, which is associated with anorexia. So, marami pa kayong alam na ibang neurotransmitters, tama? Pero ito lang yung iba kong ibinibigay para mas, maano lang tayo, ma-refresh lang tayo with the topic. Okay? So, in animal studies, nagkakaroon daw noon ng tinatawag nating single-cell recordings. So, sinubukan nila na magkaroon ng selective listening wherein may specific part at titignan nila yung responses kapag tinatanggalan nila or sinusugatan lang yung specific part sa single-celled animals. So, may tinatawag na gene lockout procedures that creates animals that lack certain kind of cells or receptors in brain and makita nila kung similar yung response, no, sa isang specific animal na meron pa rin na specific part ng genes. Okay. So, learning about brain functioning. So, paano ba naaral ng tao yung brain functioning? Or kapag pinag-uusapan natin yung cognitive neuroscience, paano ba natin inaaral? So, meron tayong tinatawag na technologies na nakakatulong or naging aid natin para mas mapag-aralan natin specific brain functions. We have here the EEG, electroencephalography, that measures electrical activity at scalp to derive electrical activity with brain. The ERP, so this is new to you, I think, is evoke response potential. So its characteristic spikes and dips in electrical signature is derived from EEG data. So meron din tayong tinatawag na direct interventions such as phrenology, no? Tignan yung mga bumps sa head natin. No, meron tayong direct stimulation, no? Usually itong mga part na to ay invasive na, no? Lesion, when we are talking about, if you could remember, Phineas Gage, si Elliot, merong damage part. No, yung nabanggit ko kanina, Broca's area. May tinatawag tayong production aphasia, which is a disorder. A damage to predominantly motor area leading to difficulty in production of speech. So, pag sinabi natin Broca's area, it's connected to the speech. Wernicke's area, receptive aphasia naman yung tawag doon, failure to comprehend. No? Comprehension ang yung problem natin, yung language specifically. Plasticity is the recovery from damage. Reuse of available areas. Ito yung pag-a-adjust ng brain natin, no? Pag-a-adapt nila para kung may damaged part, no, magiging tinatawag nating plastic yung brain. When we say plastic, no, nagkakaroon ng changes yung brain to adapt to the need or use. Okay? So, we also have the anesthesia, no? And next, we have the brain imaging. So, brain imaging, ito na yung part natin wherein gumagamit tayo ng other technologies. So, electrical recording. So, ito yung sample. Ito yung baby dyan. So, meron ditong ERPs, event-related potential, na nakikita dito sa ating results, no? Yung sa left side, these are some data collected from adult subjects for a collaborative project, ayan, between the technology itself and cognitive studies of some patients. Okay, titingnan nila yung amplitudes, no? Buti yung baby dyan, hindi naiirita. Okay? So, electroencephalography. So, para mas makita natin, records electrical activity, shows when brain activity occurs, but not where, no? When. So, event-related potential yung ERP, binanggit ko na kanina. O, yan. So, we also have static imaging. Ito yung mga, ano lang siya, one image lang na ipoproduce, no? So, andyan yung angiogram, CT scan, MRI. Okay, metabolic imaging, ito yung nag-i-insert ng specific parts sa ating, specific chemicals sa ating body, such as PET, no? Naglalagay ng radioactive material na ini-inject or ini-inhale. Tapos yun yung titignan ng ating technology. Participant is then scanned to produce an image of the brain's activity. So we also have here the fMRI that uses magnets, strong magnets, takes a series of images of brain in quick succession. Brain areas with more blood flow have been shown to have better visibility. So mas makikita yung image or mas maganda yung production image kapag may blood flow dun sa specific part ng brain. Okay, we have also the TMS, which also uses magnets. So a temporarily disruption of the functions of a particular area of the brain. Okay, so an electrical current passes through a coil on person's head that generates a magnetic field. So last, we have here the magnetoencephalography. So measures activity of the brain from outside the head by picking up magnetic fields emitted by changes in brain activity. So ayan yung MEG. Okay? Magnetic fields din siya. Ayan. So, to sum it up, makita natin dyan yung mga specific neural imaging techniques. MRI that uses magnets or magnetic fields, no, very finely detailed image of the structure and shows where but not when. So, functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, so tells about brain activity. No, mas mag-function siya kapag mas maraming blood flow. Positron emission tomography measures blood flow to brain areas in active brain. Radioactive form of oxygen glucose is injected into participants that creates image afterwards. So, you are familiar with the CAT scan or CT scan. Combines many X-ray images to build representation of structures. Ayan yung mga image na pinapresent natin at nakikita natin with the use of this specific technology. And some of the other brain disorders that are related to our brain uh, is stroke, brain tumor, and head injuries. So, nilagay ko rin dito yung link wherein pwede natin panoorin and i-attach ko rin siya doon sa ating page. So, that would be all in cognitive neuroscience and good day.